Hi there, I'm Linda and this is Huttons Valley Permaculture. It's been about 6 months now since I launched my YouTube channel and published my first tour video. So I thought it was about time that I published another one to bring you up to date with what's going on around here. It's late spring here and the weather's been really quite cool and wet. So we're still waiting for the warmth to kick in so our veggies really take off. But I do have lots of growth going on. So let me take you around and show you. Walking from the house into the kitchen garden, the first thing you may notice is the towering Swiss chard. I like to leave this as it not only self-seeds but feeds the birds and distracts them from fruiting plants such as the blueberries. These 6 blueberries give me a year's worth of fruit, 3 plants here and the others in pots. I love the convenience of the herb garden here and the spring flowers of the thyme, sage and chives. The rosemary is growing really well. The Vietnamese mint, however, is slow to kick in with the cool conditions, but I've already harvested and dried both the lemon balm and oregano. I've also harvested and dried some of the chocolate mint and spearmint for teas. The fish and birds have been enjoying the pond and the water lily flowers are just starting to appear. This mandarin tree I call Chloe after my dog who's buried beneath her. It hasn't flowered yet, but I'm hoping it soon will. Over here I've got my lemon myrtle that was really affected with the frost recently, but I'm pleased to see it's starting to shoot again. This berry plant is a boysenberry and it looks like it's got masses of fruit on it this year, so I'm looking forward to a great harvest. Right next to it I've got the red currant plant whose fruit look amazing with their bright red colours. This apple tree over here is a Crips pink apple. I haven't had fruit from it as yet. And it's not looking too healthy at the moment, so I don't know what's going on with it, but it does have a couple of little fruits on it that I might put bags over to protect from the birds. My strawberry plants are flourishing, but I haven't had much fruit because we haven't really had the warm weather to bring it on as yet. Over here I've got my raspberries. I think they're getting affected by too much water flowing out of the pond when we've had lots of rain. So they're not looking great, but they did look like this last year and kicked back in autumn. My black currant plant is slowly developing fruit. My other apple tree is a John Gold and it's got stacks of fruit on it this year. I have put bags over a couple just to make sure that the birds don't knock all of them off. But I'm looking forward to a great harvest from this little tree this year. I've got a few rhubarb plants which are doing well. And down the end here I have my 2 citrus, the lemon and the lime tree, which were really affected by the hard frost we had back in May. But hopefully with the warm weather coming they'll kick back in. That's the kitchen garden. I'm just going to walk up the hill now to the front yard garden where I've got my veggies. I still yet to get my tomatoes in. There's a lot to do, so let me show you. At the start of the garden, I've got my last bed of garlic that I need to harvest soon. And right next to it is my perennial bed, which I've got artichokes, strawberries, the asparagus are just starting to grow well. And I've lined this bed with comfrey, which I can use as a chop and drop mulch. My undercover carrots are starting to grow well. However, my newly planted veg beds have been affected by not only the cool weather, but also chickens escaping and digging them up. I'm harvesting plenty of peas to pod. In this bed here, I've got my nasturtiums planted amongst my cabbages and Brussels sprouts, and they're all going really well here. I'm still getting plenty of snow peas from these plants here, but the ones over in the other garden I'm going to be pulling out when I prepare my tomato bed shortly. These little plants here are actually volunteers, so I've covered them over to nurture them a little bit, but they're looking really healthy. I've been harvesting plenty of lettuce from my potato bed, and the potatoes are certainly coming along as the flowers are starting to blossom. There's lots of winter veg still in this little garden bed. There's cabbages and I've got kale down the end here. There's still some leeks, but they're going to seed now. And I've got a beautiful little cauliflower that's yet to be harvested. I've got some frilly lettuces and some lettuces going to seed. This is sorrel. It's a perennial salad green, which I've planted because I'm trying to increase the perennials in my garden, and it looks like it's currently going to seed. This is a Ukrainian climbing bean that I'm hoping will go over this arched trellis that I've got. There goes one of those pesky chickens now. My plan with these chickens is to move them from this mobile coop up to a chicken coop that I'm building up here. The plan is to have their chicken droppings drop through at night onto an area underneath the coop that I'll throw all the garden scraps into. And the idea is that they will slowly work on the compost that's underneath the coop and just sort of slowly rotate it down the hill, so by the time it hits the end of the hill, it's a finished compost. Well, that's the theory anyway. I've got my painted mountain corn coming up now, which is exciting. I'll be able to add my bean seeds soon, and I'm just going to scatter some lettuce seed through the middle. I never did get to stake these little peas, but they're growing really well and there's lots of flowers on them, so I'm hoping there'll be some pods that I can pick soon. This is the wild zone in my garden. I've kind of let it go a bit, so I'm going to actually get in lots of wood chips and cardboard and just redo this area right up until the greenhouse and tidy it all up. Here I've got some beetroot coming along. And I've got a bed of lettuce that I'll have to pull out soon because it's in my tomato beds that I'll be preparing really soon for planting. My purple artichokes are looking lovely. And over here I've got my onion bed, which unfortunately with the hot, cold weather, it's caused it to go to seed. So these onions won't be able to be stored, and I'll be using them fairly quickly once I harvest them. Moving past my untidy nursery area, I've got a chicken coop that I just use for when I've got young chicks, and I'll secure that sort of area. But right here I've got my trellis that I set up because I like to grow some climbing beans in this area, and they're starting to come up. They're being a bit eaten by slugs and snails, but once I can get them to the trellis, they're usually pretty resilient to those pests. So some of these are looking pretty good. Right next to the beans, I've got lots of calendula that keeps self-sowing in this area. I like to harvest the petals for teas, and I like the thought of making salves, though I haven't done it as yet. It's great for bees too. That brings us into the greenhouse. Now here's my tomato that I hooked up to the roof, and right down here you can see it's already starting to get some flowers. And I haven't even got the ones outside in the ground yet. At the back, the chilli is growing well and getting plenty of light and space. My turmeric and ginger and lemongrass have all been struggling a little bit with the cold, but the kale's happy. The chilli plants and eggplant, they're all starting to kick in. Just love the spring colour in the garden. Leaving the veggie garden behind, we're about to head out to the pasture area where my swales are and have a look out there. Just down from the corner of the property in the stockyard is the start of my swale where I've got my apricot guild. This is a tagasasti right next to the apricot that I'll have to trim. Down below I've got lemon balm and there's raspberries hiding in there. On the other side of the tagasasti are two other apricots, one there and one at the back there. In front of them I have some black currant plants and also some rhubarb. And I've got some chamomile in flower. Moving into the peach tree guild now, you can see my peach trees aren't looking too good. Well, they've got lots of fruit, but they've actually got a curly leaf disease, which is really affecting them. They have had this from the start, but this is the worst they've looked. This tree actually doesn't have any fruit on it. Hopefully they'll recover. I'm not going to do anything to treat it, but I'll just see how these plants go, and if they don't make it, I'll get something that might be more resilient in future. I've got some gooseberry plants that are hiding in amongst the weeds, but they're getting a little bit too shaded from an acacia that's nearby. So I might have to trim that and use it as a mulch and give these plants a little bit more sunshine. Also hiding in the grass are some rosemary plants and a wormwood. And here's another sad looking peach tree. I'm actually hoping that this mulch will break down. It's quite woody underneath the weeds, and eventually it will improve the soil. So I'm hoping the soil improves in time to really help these trees. It might be a few years before they're all looking healthy again. I also threw in lots of Jerusalem artichoke tubers, which will be a great food source, but also they produce a really beautiful flower. Here I've got my nectarine tree, which unfortunately is looking a little bit like my peach trees. It does have plenty of fruit on it, but the leaves are affected. So hopefully, again, this will heal as the soil starts to improve. Down below my nectarine tree, I've planted some red currants. I've also thrown in a pumpkin to see if that will sprawl around the place, and also a few flowers and some chocolate mint, again, just because it will sprawl everywhere. Further down, I've got the first of my 4 olive trees. This one has struggled to get going, but I see some nice growth happening on it now. These hazelnut trees are 2 years old. It'll still be a number of years before they start to produce nuts, but they're looking pretty good at this point. Here's a couple more of my olive trees. Again, they're starting to look good. This stump stands as a reminder to me to do my chop and drop a lot earlier in the year than I did last year. The frost really knocked the new growth out of them and they didn't recover. So I've had to plant some new little plants right next to them to take their place. The next couple of productive trees in my food forest are my 2 pear trees. These often get affected by cherry slugs, but I'm hoping my ducks have wandered up here and have been eating the larvae. That's the plan anyway, so we'll soon see if the slugs return. This is my one and only elderberry plant. I'm hoping to actually propagate these and have a lot spread around the property. It's got some beautiful flowers that you can make all sorts of things out of, and I believe the berries are lovely too. So I'm really looking forward to getting a harvest from this plant. I have a couple of casuarinas planted in my food forest. They actually fix phosphorus, and I'm going to grow some passion fruits up them as they get bigger. Hiding in amongst these support trees is a little native finger lime, but it's really struggling. It's produced a couple of fruit, but not a lot, so I really think it will benefit from being moved. This here is a rubinia, and I've got an acacia and a tagasasti surrounding it. Halfway along my top swale, I have 3 almond trees that are 2 years old. 2 of them have just got 1 or 2 fruits each, but the 3rd tree is hiding lots in amongst its branches. I'm just hoping the birds will leave them alone so that I can have a little bit of snack from this first year's harvest. I'm yet to clear the grasses at this end of the swale, but you can see over in the middle there a little citrus hiding. That's an orange tree that's probably benefiting from the protection of all this grass. It does cop a bit of the south wind and also the west wind at this location. Along this top swale, I'm noticing more and more of the red clover beginning to grow, and I'm really pleased as I've noticed grass starting to grow in the recently mulched areas on the back cutout of the swale. Right at the end of my swale, I've got my mulberry tree, which is just starting to get its nice green growth on it. My 2 alpacas, Oppie and Dusky, are currently off duty as they've had their winter coats removed, and with the chilly wet weather lately I've had them up at the hay shed so they can get some shelter if needed. They'll be back on the job pretty soon though. The bees are making the most of the sunny day, getting out and about before some more wet weather heads our way. Leaving the bees now, I'm going to walk down the hill towards my lower swale and we'll check out what's going on down there. Down at my lower swale now, you might notice my sheep shelter isn't really in its place. During a recent really strong winds, it was blown down the hill and crashed here, so I'm going to have to do something about that. This first tree on my swale is a little walnut tree that's been a bit slow to get going, but I'm glad to see it's starting to grow now. Further along the swale, past a few of my support trees, I've got the second walnut tree, Again, just slow getting going. The foliage colour is looking really lovely. I've been planting lots of trees along this swale, and my task now is to keep the weeds away from them enough so they can see the sun and start to get some growth happening. This apple tree has flowered and fruited for the first time, so that's exciting. It's a Granny Smith apple, so I'm looking forward to being able to harvest something from this tree. One of my robilias turned out to be a different variety from the rest, and it's got this lovely pink flower on it. I did chop this one back because it had broken in strong winds, so it's a bit behind the others. But I did use some of the prunings as stakes for some of my young trees, and this stake's actually flowered, which is kind of funny. The second apple tree along the swale is a Cox's orange pippin, which hasn't flowered this season. They still are young trees, so, you know, give it next season, I reckon it will be kicking in. I was a bit slow getting this magic bean tree into the ground, so I'm hoping that will recover. Right next to it, I've just planted some blackcurrant cuttings. They don't look like they've taken just yet, but I'm still hopeful they'll start to get going soon. This is my third apple tree here. I think this one's called a Frequin Rouge. I'm not sure about pronunciation, but again, it hasn't flowered, and so it's only really just getting going. And finally, we head down to my fourth apple tree, which is a Bonza variety. And again, it is just getting going. No flowers this season, but hopeful for next season. I have mulched this tree with some wool, which does release some nutrients into the soil as it breaks down. Surrounding this little tree, I've put in some extra trees. I've put in some more Tagesasti and acacias, and there's some rhubarb hiding in there too. Just below my bottom swale is my woodlot. It's where the property drops down towards a creek. I've got some holly growing too, which is a bit of a problem. You can see it just back there. I've got to start to clear that out, and I'll be using that shredded as a compost ingredient or a mulch. There's lots of trees here, and in high winds they drop a lot of branches, but I really do get a lot of resources from this area. Just beyond the fence there is the Zone 5 area, which is covered with lots of blackberries, but there's a lovely creek running right through. Yay, firewood. All that's left to do now is get this cut and ship it up to the woodshed. Heading towards the dam now, we've got the ducks. There's mostly males out swimming at the moment because all the ladies are sitting on eggs. We've had a bit of a population reduction due to foxes recently, but hoping with some hatching to bring the populations up a bit. This is Misty, who gets very protective of her eggs, so we'll leave her be. But next door, we've got Dougie looking after Ash, who's sitting on a big pile of eggs. And then here's number 3. She's on some khaki Campbell eggs. So hopefully we'll be having a few hatchings soon. And here's the paddock crew enjoying some nice lush spring grass. Now here's my roadside swale. It's so named because it's next to the road. The water comes in off the little country road into this swale. Now swales are supposed to sort of drain within 3 to 4 days, but I do find that this one holds water for quite a long period. The base is quite a clay base, and I have ripped it once to see if that would help, but it didn't do a lot. So what I'm finding is it does collect here, but one of the advantages of that is that down the end there's a little reed bed that's starting to form. I'm hoping to put in a proper reed bed to help filter any water that comes in off the little country road. It doesn't have a lot of traffic, so there's not too much coming in, but I'd still like to filter it a bit more. And for the moment, that little reed bed is home to lots of frogs, and they really love this swale because it does hold the water. But anyway, let's go and have a closer look at it. Hiding behind my Tagesasti tree is the first of 2 plum trees. This one is a satsuma and it's loaded with lots of young plums. Just next to it is my second plum tree, which is a Mariposa variety. And again, it's also loaded with lots of plums. I'm just hoping, like with all the rest of my fruit, that the birds don't discover it and take them all. I've planted 7 black currants along the swale and they're starting to take off well. And just over the other side from the black currants is another rhubarb plant. There's also some Jerusalem artichokes, and right next to that is a pomegranate plant. It's got a couple of flowers coming on it, so who knows, maybe I'll get some fruit. It is very wet and cold here, so I'm not really too sure whether it's the right climate, but regardless, it's a really pretty plant. This tree here is my Stella cherry tree, which is looking very healthy. It's got a few fruit on it, not a lot, but at least it's a start. Hopefully for next season it will be really bountiful. Moving past the robinia, I have a couple of tagasastes that I pruned back in March. So that was well before the frost that affected the other trees that I pruned. So I think I'll be doing all my chop and drop a lot earlier in the season, and hopefully it'll be as successful as these plants have been. My rescue fig tree has got 2 figs coming on it. So that's pretty exciting, but the tree next to it, which is a heartleaf fig tree, did have a lot of fruit coming on it, but it has been knocked back by the frost, so it's actually got no fruit on it now. Last season I had some gorgeous figs off this tree, so it's a bit disappointing, but with our crazy weather, that's just the way it goes. 2 more rhubarb plants here, and right next to that is my quince tree that has been affected by the native rat eating the roots. I had started to prune it back and I was going to do it hard, but stopped. But I think I will have to just take the rest of the branches out and kind of give it a bit of a chance to recover and get the root system growing again. Down here, I haven't caught up with the grasses as yet, but we'll do that shortly. This is one of my almond trees. Like the quince tree, it has had its roots eaten, so it's not very stable where it is at the moment. So I'll prune that a bit. This is the second almond tree, and it's hasn't been affected like that other almond. Down below, I've also planted some lupin seeds, which actually miraculously grew, so that's looking good. That's a nitrogen fixing legume, so we'll also stop the grasses but also help feed that tree. From this point here you can see the little gully that takes water down to the creek. By taking the water in off the road into my swales, it kind of diverts it away from this little gully, so I do use it for grazing for the animals because there's not so much water flooding down there now. Heading away from the swale now, we see the first 3 productive trees that I planted just out in the pasture area, an almond and 2 hazelnuts. Then we head back into the backyard and I've got 2 more chicken coops out the back here. One is actually one I use for younger chicks, and the other is more a breeding zone where I'll put a rooster and hens that I want to breed from. I also like different roosters, so I've just got different homes so I can accommodate them. That's Huttons Valley Permaculture Tour Spring 2021. I hope you enjoyed having a look around with me. If you did, please consider subscribing if you haven't already, and if you hit the notify button, you'll be made aware of when I upload my videos. Thanks so much for watching, and bye for now.